And so this morning we continue our journey through the wilderness on this third Sunday of Lent. Today in our reading from Exodus, we encounter the Israelites and Moses, who are also on their own journey through the wilderness. God has just freed the Israelites from their slavery in Egypt. God himself has just appointed and commissioned a leader, Moses, who would lead God's people through the wilderness to the promised land. But as their journey through the wilderness to the promised land drags on and on, the Israelites are getting thirsty. Our text opens by telling us that the whole Israelite community is traveling place to place as the Lord commanded. Now think about that. This is a whole community of thousands upon thousands of men, women, and children, plus their livestock, all trudging along through this hot desert in hopes of reaching something better. Israel is being incredibly obedient to the God that freed them from slavery. But now, the Israelites are getting tired and dusty. They are completely fed up, and who can blame them? They have been trekking through the desert for quite some time. The heat and the monotony of the landscape is now starting to get to them. They have to make do with what little they are carrying on their backs and what is around them, which unfortunately doesn't add up to be very much. To make matters worse, the Israelites find themselves without water. We all know water to be essential to life. It is said that humans can survive only 100 hours without water, and even less in a fiercely hot place like the desert, especially when you are walking all day long. And so, it is completely understandable that Israel would be getting thirsty, testy, and argumentative. After all, the Israelites are only human. As they grow thirsty, the Israelites start asking themselves, why did we ever leave Egypt in the first place? What dream are we chasing? Is God even here in the desert with us or not? This feels like a life-threatening situation for the Israelites. They are suffering in the harsh elements of the wilderness without water. They assess their immediate situation as a nation and resolve that things are seemingly hopeless. Now it must be pointed out that God has been meeting all of their needs up until this point. From the moment he heard their cry in Egypt, several chapters earlier, God has indeed been caring for the Israelites. He has been looking out for his people. God has been scattering manna around the wilderness to nourish them and to teach them to trust in him on this unknown journey. The Israelites have seen his love for them with their very own eyes. So why wouldn't they simply trust God to come through for them again in their time of thirst? Why wouldn't they just pray to God for water? Sometimes when we live into God's ways and faithfully follow his plan for us, life gets tough and we begin to feel like we are suffering. In these moments, it becomes all too easy to focus on our suffering and lose sight of God's faithfulness to us. It becomes easy to stop trusting God even though he has always provided faithfully for us in the past. This is exactly what seems to happen to the Israelites as their thirst continues to crowd their greater judgment. And so, instead of praying to God for water, they choose to grumble and fight. In their grumbling and arguing, they collectively decide who to blame for their circumstances. Moses, the guy leading them on this journey in the first place. They find fault with Moses and demand that he give them water to drink. Moses replies to them, "Why do you quarrel with me? Why do you put the Lord to the test?" The problem was that the immediate need of the Israelites overwhelmed their trust in the God who had promised to continue meeting their needs as he always had. But their situation doesn't improve. We are told the Israelites again responded to Moses out of anger and upset. They say, "Why did you bring us up out of Egypt? To kill us and our children and our livestock with thirst?" The Israelites are still caught up in their thirst, so they continue in their complaining instead of praying and trusting. This response from the Israelites demonstrates a natural human response to such hardship. These people have just lived through immense hardship during their time in slavery. God was supposed to be leading them to something better, but now they feel like their families and livestock are on the verge of dying. The stress of the grumbling Israelites causes Moses to cry out to the Lord, saying, "What am I to do with these people? They are almost ready to stone me." Now it is curious that Moses appears somewhat passive in resolving their immediate need for water. Moses does not pray for water, but rather for God's guidance in leading his people. This attitude of Moses, though seemingly irresponsible at a first glance, illustrates faith and hope held out in times of hardship. His response reveals his persistent belief that it is God who is still in control. God is responsible for them in their current situation, and God does care. Moses trusted and had hope that God would intervene through his merciful grace. After all, God had already provided water to the Israelites when they could not find any suitable to drink just a few chapters before. Why wouldn't our Creator do it again in his own way, in his own time? And God does indeed intervene through his merciful grace. We read that the Lord answers Moses in the sight of the elders. He provides them with water out of a rock. God is fully aware of the hardships that Moses and the Israelites are facing on their journey through the wilderness. By providing them with water, he reminds them just how much he cares for them and that he is always with them. He is still sustaining his people and providing for their needs. No, they are by no means perfect. And yes, they argue and they doubt. But no matter what, God is still with his people. Despite the fact that the Israelites test God instead of trusting him and argue with their divinely appointed leader Moses, God shows no anger or criticism toward the Israelites. He doesn't punish them for their attempt to test their faithful God. Rather, he graciously provides for their needs. God continues to bless his willful and rebellious children. He continues to reach out in love, just like he did for all of us on the cross. As we see through this example of the Israelites' journey, and here affirmed to us by the Apostle Paul, the journeys we are on aren't always easy. Faithfully following God is not always an easy thing. But as Paul tells us, we have all been given the grace and peace of God through the Spirit to help get us through. And because we are filled with God's grace and peace, we all boast in our sufferings, knowing that suffering produces endurance, and endurance produces character, and character produces hope. According to Paul, hardships and sufferings, like being thirsty in the wilderness without water, are not things for us to avoid, escape, or even complain about. Tough times in life are not meant to drive us away from God. Rather, hardships and sufferings are essential and inevitable parts of our faith journey. If we choose to have hope and act in peace in the midst of our suffering, we will strengthen in endurance and character. Our faith and trust in God will grow greater. Faith in God enables believers to appreciate what they are experiencing and to look forward to promised eternity. Because no matter what earthly struggles or difficulties we find ourselves in, we know that our future has been secured in Christ. Because of this glorious fact, Paul goes on to say that hope does not disappoint us, because God's love has been poured into our hearts through the Holy Spirit that has been given to each and every one of us. God's love won when God died for all. And God didn't wait for us to come to him before graciously turning his face to us. God didn't even wait for us to go away and clean ourselves up before claiming each of us as his forgiven children on the cross. Even though we were and still are helpless and powerless, Paul reminds us that God died for each and every one of us. We are all reconciled to God. Reconciliation with God made possible by divine love for the undeserving, as demonstrated by the once-for-all event of Jesus' death, an event that gives us as Christ followers hope in all circumstances. Now, hope is different than optimism. Optimism is the sunny view that tomorrow will be a better day. But optimism is vastly inferior to hope. Hope is faith and trust that all will ultimately be well. Christian hope means that even if tomorrow is worse, things will ultimately be well, because our future is secure in God's hands. And if it is God who holds our eternal future, then how could things possibly get any worse? You see, hope is not a personal wish. Hope is the confident anticipation of the coming reality of the glory of God, the fulfillment of God's purpose for all of creation. Hope means that one day we will all be dwelling in eternity with our Creator, once and for all, in the place that He prepares for each of us. this is the hope that will get us through tough times as Christians, no matter what wilderness we find ourselves wandering in. But after the week that we have all had, I think we can certainly resonate with the hardships and the fear that the Israelites faced in the wilderness. When we began our journey into the wilderness at the beginning of the season of Lent, just a few short weeks ago, we had no idea where this journey would really take us. I don't think we had any idea just a few weeks ago that we would now be without sports entertainment, or that schools would be closing for several weeks, or that most shelves in most stores would be cleared. We just did not anticipate the magnitude of the implications of the many precautions that need to be taken to lessen the spread of the virus, while researchers race against the clock to learn more about it. And now we are living in an unexpected, chaotic reality. As we watch this mess unfold around us, we too might be wondering where God is as we continue to journey through this wilderness. Hope can be in short supply when you are wandering in the wilderness, not knowing if or when conditions will improve. Yet, in a time like this, we must continue to have hope, this hope that Paul talks of. We have the privilege of serving a God who has created everything and loves all that he has created. We must trust that God is holding us in his caring arms, as anxious and fearful as the world around us may seem. We must trust that God has a plan unfolding in the midst of the mess around us. We must have hope that things will ultimately be well, because no matter what happens in our earthly life, we have all been promised a place in eternity with our very own Creator. And so, may we not let the virus and the fear in the world overwhelm our trust in God, who has promised to meet us in our needs. Just as he has faithfully provided for his people before, even when there seemed to be no hope for the Israelites in their thirst. So too will God provide a way through this mess for each and every one of us. God will provide us with hope in his own way and his own time, because he loves each and every one of us. It's funny how the lectionary works, as though God knew exactly where we would be on this day as these texts were assigned to us. Because these passages this morning remind us that our God is a mighty God who holds each of us in his hands. That God has known us and loved us, and he will continue to know us and love us and provide for all of our needs and so much more. They teach us that we can boast in this living God, and that we can indeed rejoice in his hope even when we are facing hardships. God will continue to love and care for all of his children in this world he has made. And so together, let us rejoice and hope in this, and share that hope with others during this time when God's hope is so desperately needed in this world. My friends, the Apostle Paul has said, "If God is for us, then who or what could possibly be against us?" May God's hope shine brightly through all of you. Amen.